It is time once again this June 24th morning for another edition of Goodwin Square, where we tell stories about people that I have met around the country that mean so well and have good intentions, but just not quite there and kind of square at the end. Today, our story takes us to Pasadena, California, where, as William was once a homeless man, he met another homeless man who was not in a shelter because at the time, and still is from what I hear today, there are no shelters in Pasadena or anywhere around Pasadena for that matter, as far as housing homeless men and stuff. So, anyways, I met a guy named Johnny, and it's like, no, his name was John. His name was John, and honest to God, his name was John, and he was a white guy, and he wasn't gay, he wasn't a prostitute or anything. His name was John and stuff. So, but anyways, I got to know John, and we became friends and pals and stuff like that. And in time, I learned that John was a bit different. He wasn't like quite normal. And I learned this one night when I invited him and this woman, uh, uh, when I invited this woman that he always stayed with. He always stayed with Diane, okay? He always, clung to Diane. Wherever John was, Diane was right next to him, okay? And yeah, the Diane from Stone Mountain, yes, that Diane. It was that Diane. And he had Diane and himself. And one day he was complaining to me because he was running out of squats. He was running out of places to stay the night without any trouble. Okay. And this is like late 90s, it was before Batman and, all the super, comics and stuff. And so I had a place over at Fullerton parking lot that was secure and safe and nobody bothered me. And, I didn't bother anybody. So I invited him and Diane one night over to my squat in the parking lot over at Fullerton Seminary. So they came over. And that night I was awoken in the middle of the night by somebody talking and like yelling and screaming and stuff. And I woke up. And Diane and John were opposite me. And Diane was awake. And John was talking in his sleep. And he was like yelling and cursing and screaming. And I gave a puzzled look to Diane. And she says, he always does this. This is a nightly thing with him. Just, give him 5 minutes, he'll fall back to sleep, and you can go to sleep once again. And sure enough, it happened. John did as Diane knew from experience what was going on. So that was that. So, but I asked Diane, I was like, what's going on with John later? And she said, well, he just has, he has issues and he has problems and stuff. And, he was abused as a child. And I'm like, oh, really? How so? She said, well, his dad was a beater. I mean, he would, he didn't sexually abuse his children or his wife. He would beat his wife and children. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. And so anyways, I forgot about it. Time went on. And one day I was with John, and I wanted to kind of test him and kind of verify that he grew up in a home with domestic abuse, from a military father who beat not only his mother, but also his children. And so I tested John. I said, yeah, Diane tells me that, your dad was like a real prick. He's like, yeah, he used to, he used to beat us and stuff and, more than just, the belt and stuff. And he used to beat my mom and sister. I'm like, he used to beat your sister? It's like, yeah. It's like, it's like, I'm like, really? It's like, yeah. I mean, he would beat, it didn't matter. Gender did not matter to my old man. It was like, whether it's, my mom or my sister, it didn't matter. He would, discipline them or whatever, regardless. And I don't know. I mean, I was naive. It was the first time I was on the street. And so I said, I tested him. I said, all right, give me a story about when give me an incident, because I thought, well, let him tell me of an incident that happened. And the truth will be in the details. I mean, that's a great way of finding out if somebody's fooling you or somebody's like, So John went and explained one family dinner where his sister, said something out of place, and his dad got up from the dining room table and punched her, not slapped her, punched her. And John said, when he punched her, like blood and a tooth went flying against the wall. I said, John's not lying. The truth is in the details. The truth is in the, in the pudding, if you will, on the dinner table. And it's like, he described it so graphically. And I was like, and I, and later learned that John's mother finally got around to divorcing this husband of hers and leaving him. And that she lived like in a town, one town away or two towns away from Pasadena, where he was homeless, where he was living, on the street with Diane. And I once told him, I said, it's like, John, why don't you live at your mother's house? I was like, no, I don't want to, is it true what Diane said, that she has like a bedroom for you, like a separate bedroom for you to live in, and that you could live with her? He's there, yeah, she does. She has a spare bedroom in her home that she owns in Sierra Madre. But I just don't care to live with my mother and my sister. I'm like, well, wait a minute. You mean your sister still lives with her mother? It's like, yeah, my sister still lives with mom. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, you're my age. You're 45, 50 years old. I mean, your sister can't be 18. It's like, no, my sister is like 45 or 50. He gave me a number. And it was like, and she's a big executive at this business or that business. And it's like, but she could move out and stuff, but, she just wants to stay and live with my mom. And she's never moved out of my mom's place. And she lives with my mom. And she's like this executive or that. I'm like, and it was like a real big brand. It was, we're not talking like Starbucks, shift manager. We're talking like, oh, this is big time management executive. And she just lives at home with my mom and stuff. And I'm like, all right, why don't you, as your mother's son, also live at home? I mean, I was like, your sister doesn't seem to have, pride, I guess. I don't know what the word is to stay at home. It's just, why are you not humble enough, here on the streets of Pasadena where there are no homeless shelters, for men, certainly. Why don't you stay at your mother's? Well, he just walked off as I stood in the street. June 24th, it's Goodwin Square. The legacy of domestic abuse, the top.